Marco Rubio has just released this important report proving that Communist Cuba is responsible for creating far-left groups and movements in the United States. A giant step toward bringing about the final downfall of the Cuban dictatorship.
And they operate alongside hostile foreign states that share their mission, such as the Iranian proxy networks in Iraq, which are increasingly closely linked to leftist militant groups around the world. The vast intelligence and ideological network of the Cuban regime helped build the far left in our country and in our hemisphere, and remains inextricably linked to far-left groups and movements within and beyond the West. Today's far-left terrorists can raise money in one country, they can host their communications in a second country. They can receive training in a third country, they can recruit militants in a fourth country, and together attack a target in a fifth country.
The State Department published Cuba, the capital of 21st century communism, and accuses the regime of leading a campaign of espionage, political infiltration, propaganda, and subversion within the United States for nearly 7 decades. Marco Rubio presented the document as a public exposure of a threat that, according to him, had been ignored for too long. The most explosive accusation is that Cuba did not act only as an ally of the former Soviet Union. The document states that Havana built a public project, mixing intelligence services, front groups, exchanges, political organizations, academic centers, and radical movements. The State Department claims that Cuban agents infiltrated circles of the American government, cultivated activists, and supported far-left actions on American soil. Rubio tries to frame these accusations as a matter of national security and not just as a diplomatic dispute with a communist island. In recent hours, the so-called National Rapid Response Plan, distributed in June by the National Network on Cuba, an American coalition with more than 60 organizations, has gained prominence. The plan calls for coordinated actions within 24 hours in the event of a United States attack on Cuba, or even if a threat is considered imminent. Among the locations indicated for mobilization are military bases, recruitment offices, federal buildings, courthouses, immigration agencies, and sports arenas during major events. The stated goal would be to make any action by Washington politically and materially costly. Another alarming point involves a database with 1,335 military and police facilities spread across the Western Hemisphere. The report links this material to the Black Alliance for Peace and states that it could guide the organization of protests and actions at strategic locations.
Cuba is something quite different, yes. The big misunderstanding is that Cuba is not run by the government, but by a military holding company called GAESA. GAESA practically owns everything in the country. The tourism sector, mining, and gas stations, they control everything. They generate about 70% of Cuba's GDP under the control of this military company and manage assets ranging from $14 to $17 billion. Meanwhile, there are people going hungry, and the power grid hasn't been maintained for 10 years, but this military holding company continues to sit on these assets. And by the way, absolutely not a single cent from this holding company goes to the public treasury. The fundamental challenge is that Cuba needs serious reforms to avoid becoming a failed state and a threat to Zezinu. They need economic reforms. And the question is, can they actually reform with the people who are currently in power?
An American government official said that internal security and counterterrorism agencies are examining the case carefully because some organizations gathered in this structure have already participated in violent actions in the past. The document focuses attention on 6 structures: the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples, the National Network on Cuba, Code Pink, the People's Forum, Democratic Socialists of America, and the National Lawyers Guild. Washington describes the Cuban Institute as an international center of influence linked to the government of Havana. According to the investigation, this structure maintains contact with more than 2,000 solidarity organizations in over 150 nations, creating a network capable of spreading propaganda, organizing delegations, and bringing American activists closer to Cuban authorities. The report also mentions activist trips to Cuba, meetings with government officials, campaigns against American sanctions, and structures used to finance or organize political movements. Rubio's accusation is that Havana mixes espionage, propaganda, ideological pressure, and support for revolutionary organizations into a single long-term strategy. To put together the document, the State Department gathered memos released by intelligence, National Security Council documents, research, public records, and materials produced by the organizations themselves. In Rubio's own publication, the dark cover of the report appears, accompanied by the accusation that, for more than 6 decades, the Cuban regime has been one of the main sponsors of left-wing radicalism and third worldism within the United States. In the video released by Eric Dougherty, Rubio appears in front of the State Department seal while a page called "The Revolutionary State" is displayed. The image shared by Austin Defender reinforces the seriousness of the accusation by presenting Cuba as the center of an international structure of influence, rather than as an isolated and weakened government. In the post made by Congressman Carlos Aguimenes, the reaction came in an even harsher tone. He stated that the Cuban dictatorship represents a significant threat to American national security, supported the exposé made by Rubio, and declared that Cuba should be the next focus of pressure from Washington. In another video posted by Aguimenes, dissident Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara appears after arriving in Miami following 5 years of imprisonment in Cuba. He was welcomed by supporters, visited the National Shrine of Our Lady of Charity, and once again called for an end to the dictatorship and the Castro dynasty.
Cuban dissident and musician Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara was released from a 5-year prison sentence in Cuba and was granted parole in the United States. Did the Cubans simply release him, and does his release indicate that something new is happening in Cuba?
Actually, no, he really served his sentence, so he had been there since July 11, 2021. He was one of the leaders of the massive protests that happened that day, and simply for asking for freedom, he was thrown in prison for 5 days. That's what a communist regime brings you, so all these people here in the United States asking for socialism, communism, that's what you get. And now he's in the land of freedom here in the United States. And what's happening in Cuba, again, is the same kind of pressure. Not military, but economic pressure is starting to work. Rubio.
He used the case to demand the release of the other political prisoners and accused Havana of persecuting those who demand freedom through art. Otero Alcántara was detained during the July 2021 protests and sentenced on charges involving public disorder, contempt, and national symbols. Human rights organizations considered him a political prisoner. For several days, not even his supporters knew where he was. He entered the United States through a humanitarian parole. His arrival in Miami happened on the condition that he leave Cuba. The release, followed by forced departure from the island, opened another front of pressure for Havana, just as Rubio was releasing the document. While the report denounces networks of influence operating within the United States, the video in Miami features a dissident who was released from prison and had to leave his own country in order to keep speaking out. The next concrete move could come from the Department of Justice, the Treasury, the FBI, or the White House. If the investigations find violations of sanctions, irregular activity with a foreign agent, or illegal financing linked to structures tied to Havana. Thank you very much for watching this video until the end. Support our project and contribute financially through the Pix key that appears on your screen. We are an independent channel focused on keeping you informed and bringing you the truth. Your contribution helps us keep going.